Support for TED Radio Hour and the following message come from Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Introducing Rate Shield Approval. If you qualify and if rates go up, your rate stays the same. But if rates go down, your rate also drops. To learn more, go to rocketmortgage.com/ideas.
Hey everyone, just a quick note to let you know that I promise, we are working on a bunch of new shows. They do take time, so please bear with us. But in the meantime, enjoy this one. It's from our archives. It's a great episode called Playing with Perceptions. And it's all about where stereotypes come from and why they stick around, and if there's actually any truth to the assumptions that we make about people. This is the TED Radio Hour. Each week, groundbreaking TED Talks.
TED Talks.
TED.
Technology.
Entertainment.
Design.
Is that really what it stands for? I've never known that.
Delivered at TED conferences around the world.
The gift of the human imagination.
We've had to believe in impossible things.
The true nature of reality beckons from just beyond.
Those talks, those ideas, adapted for radio. From NPR. I'm Guy Raz. So a few years ago, Sarah Jones went to L.A. to audition for a TV show, and this was before she became a well-known playwright and performer. Anyway, one afternoon, she took a walk around Hollywood.
And I was walking with a fellow woman of color, as we say, and we were crossing the street. It started to say "Don't walk" as we were, making our way to the other side.
And out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw a police car drive up, lights flashing.
And I remember thinking, I wonder who they're flashing their lights at. There aren't any cars in the vicinity. There's only the two of us crossing the street. There's no way we could be, getting pulled over. You can't get pulled over while you're walking. And in fact, you can. And they did bend us over the car and say, are you girls working tonight? And it wasn't even nighttime. It was like the middle of the day.
So they sort of stopped you and they told you to turn around so they could frisk you?
Absolutely. It was like, are you girls working tonight? And, I just remember, I can't say I went ballistic, but I had the instinct that if I started talking like that, they'd be a lot more respectful, that I'd sort of stop them with my superpower of transmuting my class status and nationality in the moment in real time. But I thought better of it, thank God.
So it's important to know that this is what Sarah Jones does as a performer. She becomes different ethnic characters. And by the way, all the voices that you'll hear for the next 10 minutes or so, they are all Sarah Jones. And a few years ago, she won a Tony Award for a play she wrote based on those characters. Now, all that success happened long after that day the cops stopped her in Hollywood, when Sarah realized her first instinct was not to be herself.
My thought was, I need to elevate my status somehow. I'm a woman of color, I'm with another woman of color. We're, low on the ladder of who requires respect.
So the cops did let Sarah and her friend go after about 10 minutes. But at that moment, it hit her just how much she'd internalized the way those cops saw her, and how even before she spoke a single word, all of these assumptions were made about who she was. So when she went back to New York, she started to focus her work on this very idea, on how we perceive others and how they see us.
Wherever I am and there's an underground or a bus system, I try to ride it. And looking at all of these people packed into a small space together, I've thought about, what if, the kid, or the young dude, African-American, whatever you want to call it, he's standing there, kind of looking around a train and he sees this little old lady. And what if he looks at me and he's thinking he knows what's going through my head? And what would I have to say to the both of them? And that it is entirely possible that we would all come together and say, did you see that episode of Game of Thrones last night? My God.
We've all been judged for reasons beyond our control, perceived to be something we're not. And the thing about it is, we all do it to other people too. But can understanding why really change anything? Today on the show, TED speakers who are all playing with perceptions, challenging stereotypes, and in some cases, embracing them.
I guess,
I feel that,
Like Sarah's character, Bella.
it's even like the kids I babysit, when I talk to them, they're kind of like the only president they've ever known is Black. And like, I really kind of identify more with that than like the people who are like, oh my God, Black, white. Like, let's keep like talking about how different we all are for another 24-hour news cycle. It's like, you guys are like really bored.
So if you watch Sarah's performance, and if you get a chance, you should, because it is almost impossible to believe that these voices are coming out of the same person, you find yourself wondering if what you're watching is like a series of stereotypes and whether that's okay. Here's Sarah Jones on the TED stage.
So I'm very happy that you are, doing this kind of thing, making the talks available online. That's very good. I love that. And I love you guys. I love TED. And if you don't mind, privately now, in the future, I'm going to think of TED as an acronym for Technology, Entertainment, and Dominicans. Thank you very much. So that was Nareda, and just like Lorraine and everybody else you're meeting today, these are folks who are based on real people from my real life. Friends, neighbors, family members. I come from a multicultural family. In fact, the older lady you just met, very, very loosely based on a great aunt on my mother's side. It's a long story, believe me. But on top of my family background, my parents also sent me to the United Nations School, where I encountered a plethora of new characters, including, par exemple, my French teacher, and she would be there, kind of talking with the class, talking about the existential futility of life, and we were only 11 years old, so it was not appropriate. But so there were the teachers, and then there were my friends, classmates from everywhere, many of whom are still dear friends to this day, and they've inspired many characters as well. For example, a friend of mine. Well, I just wanted to quickly say good evening. My name is Praveen Manvi, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Of course, Ted, the reputation precedes itself all over the world.
I mean, of course, there are elements of all these people that's hyperbole, right? I mean, it's like a sort of caricature of a type of person, but they exist.
They do. That's absolutely true. There's just the concept of, look, what is a stereotype anyway, And I remember somebody asking me about, well, you don't want to portray, for example, a Latino person who's a domestic worker or, an Italian American who's a cop. You can't do that. Why can't you do that? That itself isn't the problem. I think for me, where it starts to get tricky is when I'm assigning, some kind of moral judgment on, oh, well, if you do this kind of work, you must be a person who's limited or less than. That is where it gets tricky. Or I guess it's just the oversimplification. Like stereotyping is about taking what's true and oversimplifying it in a way that seeks to oppress or marginalize a group of people.
And I mean, and what you do, I guess, is more like an homage.
I hope what I do is, portray people as honestly as I can, with a view to, I don't want to say sustaining, but sort of just honoring their basic humanity. I try not to strip away what's actually there.
But I mean, in doing that, you have to kind of stay aware, right? I mean, that you're not crossing a line and then offending someone, right?
I'll let somebody else field this. Let me see. My name is Pauline Ling. I think I know you from the TED conference. You are one of those TED people. TED guy. Okay, that's my bad joke. But even though as an immigrant, my English, it's not perfect. I think that people, when they get offense, it's because inside they feel so fear that they will not be able to see the person. Only they hear accent, they say, oh no, I am not supposed to relate to that person. If I am happy, you cannot offend me. I speak the way I speak. No problem. I don't have fear. Your offense is about you, not me.
Okay, whether or not you agree with Sarah, what she's really trying to say with her performances is that when it comes to stereotypes, to the way we view each other and our differences, we are probably way overthinking it.
And what I think we need is to underthink it. We need less pontificating and analysis and brow furrowing and kind of nervous hand-wringing and more truly honest conversation. The times when I have the most fun, I've gone and performed in such incredible places, Indonesia or Ethiopia or in the Middle East, wherever I've gone, the conversation is so fruitful when we just sit there and get really rigorously honest in the moment. And it's not always pleasant the entire time. It can get a little messy. But I think all this tidiness isn't doing us any good. It just spills out anyway.
Good evening. My name is Habiba Rahal, and I would like to, first of all, thank Sarah Jones for putting all of the pressure on the only Arab who she brought with her to be last today. I am originally from Jordan, and I teach comparative literature at Queen's College. So if you will indulge me, I will share quickly with you a bit of verse which I memorized as a young girl, 16 years of age, so back in the ancient times. أرجوك تقولي إنك بتخليني أمسك إيدك، خليني أحط إيدي في إيدك، عايزة أمسك إيدك، كل ما ألمس إيدك بفرح قلبي، مش قادر أخبيه، مش قادر أخبي حبي. And this, it roughly translates, please let me hold your hand. I want to hold your hand. I want to hold your hand. And when I touch you, I feel happy inside. It's such a feeling that my love, I can't hide. I can't hide. I can't hide. Well, but please, if it is sounding familiar, it is because I was at the same time in my life listening to the Beatles on the Radio Ramallah. They were very popular. So all of that is to say that I like to believe that for every word intended to render us deaf to one another, there is always a lyric connecting ears and hearts across the continents in rhyme. And I pray that this is the way that we will self-invent in time. That's all. Shukran. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Okay? Great.
Thank you all very much. It was lovely. Thank you for having me.
Sarah Jones as Habiba just now. She's given 2 TED Talks, and you only heard excerpts from one of them here. Check out both of them at TED.com.
I was totally not expecting to be asked to join this round table. It's not really round.
I'm not sure if I would ask Bella to babysit my kids, but maybe.
I'm exceedingly responsible babysitter.
I'm Guy Raz. More ideas about the limits of perceptions, assumptions, and stereotypes in a moment. You're listening to the TED Radio Hour from NPR. Hey, everyone. Just a quick thanks to one of our sponsors who helps make this podcast possible, Smartwater. Smartwater aims to go beyond what others are doing. Taking inspiration from the clouds themselves, Smartwater one-ups them by adding electrolytes for a clean, crisp taste. Smartwater, vapor distilled for purity, electrolytes for taste.
Support also comes from Little Black Stretchy Pants, the recently released memoir from Lululemon Athletica founder Chip Wilson. Notorious for both his business acumen and marketing brainpower, Wilson shares lessons learned along the way to building a billion-dollar business. From public guffaws to ringing the closing bell at NASDAQ, Wilson shares how a cultural trend created an idea for a business that spurred one of the greatest changes in the history of how we dress. So head to Amazon.com to pre-order your copy today.
It's the TED Radio Hour from NPR. I'm Guy Raz. And on today's show, playing with perceptions, ideas about assumptions, prejudice, and stereotypes. Are there like perceptions that people have of you that like really get under your skin?
Oh, man, all the time.
This is Maz Jobrani. He's a comedian.
So when I'll be doing a show and I'll say, like, guys, like when you hear British, what do you think? And they sing, they think cool accent, rock star, James Bond.
Maz, by the way, is Iranian-American.
And then when you hear, like, Iranian, what do you think? Well, oil, terrorist, Khomeini. Like, Khomeini is our James Bond. It's like, that's not right, For the most part, when you see us in the major media, it's some evil dude with a beard and that ominous music. It's that.
And as an actor, Maz has played his fair share of evil bearded dudes, as he explained on the TED stage.
A lot of times in Hollywood, when casting directors find out you're of Middle Eastern descent, they go, "Oh, you're Iranian, great. Can you say, 'I will kill you in the name of Allah'?" I go, "I could say that, but what if I were to say, 'Hello, I'm your doctor'?" They go, "Great, and then you hijack the hospital." Like, I think you're missing the point here. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind playing bad guys. I want to play a bad guy. I want to rob a bank. I want to rob a bank in a film. But do it with a gun, not with a bomb strapped around me, right? Because I imagine the director, "Maz, I think your character would rob the bank with a bomb around him." Why would I do that? If I want the money, why would I kill myself? Right? Give me all your money or I'll blow myself up. Well, then blow yourself up. Just do it outside, please.
So what is the worst role that you've ever been asked to do?
Well, starting out, I would just go on any audition that came my way. So I actually got a Chuck Norris movie of the week once called The President's Man, A Line in the Sand. I played this guy who was like a physicist who was in Chicago to blow up a building.
I've lived here in Chicago for 10 years now. Your father, Rashid, he paid for my education. A PhD in applied physics from Northwestern.
And he worked for like a Osama bin Laden type guy.
I knew one day I'd be called upon to serve a greater good. To serve Allah.
And I went for the fitting, and they go, "Okay, here's your shirt, here's your pants, here's your turban." And I swear, and I was like, whoa. I go, "This guy wouldn't wear a turban." They go, "No, well, he's this Afghan guy. We want him to wear a turban." I go, "First of all, Afghans in America don't wear turbans. And secondly, if he's trying to blow up a building, he definitely is not going to wear a turban." I said, "That's just stupid." I said, "Please let them know." So she's like, "Okay, I'll talk to them, see what happens." So then the next day I show up at the trailer, and there's my shirt, there's my pants, and there's a scarf. And I was like, "Oh, great. You guys gave me a scarf." She's like, "No, that's the turban. You just got to wrap it around your..."
Abir.
So I wore the stupid turban.
The closer I get to Allah,
And I swear, I tried watching it, and it was so bad.
the more peaceful I become.
And then I said no more. I said no more terrorist parts.
It might be funny now, but for Maz, for a lot of actors who get typecast because of their ethnicity, it can get depressing. So comedy, it helps.
Stand-up comedy is really like therapy. So whether you're dealing with ethnic issues or you're dealing with just issues at the house, you're having an issue with your wife or your kids or whatever it is, you go on stage and you can actually just riff about it and find the funny in it. And really, by finding the funny in it, it helps you cope.
Does it feel like some of those tropes about Muslims or Arabs, that came after September 11th, like have they kind of dropped off a little in the past few years, or is it worse?
No, listen, man, it's always like one step forward, two steps back, because anytime you think like, oh, great, we get a break, Al Qaeda's slowing down. Oh, here comes ISIS. It's always, even this is just going to exist no matter what happens. I mean, you could have 1,000 Iranian or Arab doctors saving lives every day in the United States, and the lack of exposure that would get compared to one Muslim trying to blow up a car bomb in Times Square, like the Pakistani guy had tried to do it years ago. And now the Muslims are coming to get us again.
Now, I happened to be in Times Square that night doing a comedy show. And a few months before that, there was a white American guy in Austin, Texas, who flew his airplane into the IRS building. And I happened to be in Austin that day doing a stand-up comedy show. Now, I'll tell you, as a Middle Eastern male, when you show up around a lot of these activities, you start feeling guilty at one point. I was watching the news. I'm like, am I involved in this crap? I didn't get the memo. What's going on? But what was interesting was when the white guy flew his plane into the building, I know all my Middle Eastern and Muslim friends in the States were watching TV going, please don't be Middle Eastern, don't be Hassan, don't be Hossein. And the name came out, Jack. I'm like, woo! That's not one of us. But I kept watching the news in case they came back. They were like, before he did it, he converted to Islam. Damn it! Why, Jack? Why?
Do you ever come across people who are, who are Middle Eastern or Iranian or Arab American who are just like, screw this, I just want to completely hide from my identity because I'm just tired of like being tagged for something that I'm not.
Absolutely. I mean, I used to do a joke about how a lot of Iranians just became Tony. Yeah, they became Italian. I mean, that was the way they dealt with it. Because I tell you, if you look at it in the recent history and in the U.S., so you got 1979, 1980, you got the revolution, then you got the hostage situation, then you got the movie Not Without My Daughter.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah. Which is about an American woman married to an Iranian man, and in America he's great, but as soon as they go to Iran, he turns into an animal. I remember, like, when Not Without My Daughter came out, I'm serious, I think that dating from Iranian men became a lot harder. Dudes named Shahrukh became Tony. Masood became Mike. I mean, these guys were like, screw it, I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
When we were all together, we'd be speaking Farsi, yeah, what's up, da-da-da-da-da. As soon as, like, some blonde girls would go by, hey, girls, how are you? This is Mike, this is Tony, this is Vinny. It's like, what? We're the Sopranos.
I mean, what's like the balance between finding the funny side of a stereotype and then actually trying to break it?
Look, stereotypes exist because there's always some truth to stereotypes. Not always, but often. And I personally feel like if there's a balance out there, I think the good thing about America is that it is a melting pot. There's so many different people here. And I myself, sometimes I see something and it breaks a stereotype. When I see Asian Americans, I expect them to speak either like this or with an Asian, like a Chinese accent or Korean accent or Japanese accent or whatever. But I was in New York one time and I saw this Asian American talking like this. How you doing? What's going on? Hey, gay. And I was like, what? It just blew my mind. I was like, it's like an Asian Goomba. So, that's going to exist. And so for me, I think the breaking of stereotypes is more interesting.
But one of the things I try to do with my stand-up is to break stereotypes, and I've been guilty of stereotyping as well. I was in Dubai, and there's a lot of Indians who work in Dubai, and they don't get paid that well, and I got in my head that all the Indians there must be workers. And I forgot there's obviously successful Indians in Dubai as well. I was doing a show, and they said, we're going to send a driver to pick you up. So I went down to the lobby, and I saw this Indian guy. I go, he's got to be my driver. Because he was standing there in like a cheap suit, thin mustache, staring at me. So I went over, excuse me, sir, are you my driver? He goes, no, sir. I own the hotel. I go, I'm sorry, then why were you staring at me? He goes, I thought you were my driver. I'll leave you guys with this. I try with my stand-up to break stereotypes, present Middle Easterners in a positive light, Muslims in a positive light, and I hope that in the coming years, more film and television programs come out of Hollywood presenting us in a positive light. Who knows, maybe one day we'll even have our own James Bond, right? My name is Bond, Jamal Bond. Till then, I'll keep telling jokes. I hope you keep laughing. Have a good day. Thank you.
Comedian and actor Maz Jobrani, he's about to release an action movie spoof with a Middle Eastern protagonist who does not play a terrorist. It's called Jimmy Westwood, American Hero. Okay, picture this scene. There's a guy on the TED stage. He looks like he's from India or Pakistan, brown skin, slim, probably about 30. And he's on a chair wearing a traditional Indian kurta pajama. But he's not sitting, he's squatting like a yogi. And on another chair next to him is a woman who looks Chinese. Her name is Yu Rao. And the Indian-looking guy, he's the performance artist Hitain Patel. And Yu is his translator.
我们可以透过学习不同的语言，来认识不同的文化嘛。
So if you're confused, that's the point. Here's Hitain Patel.
更重要的是手势、特有的习惯和动作。
Hi, I'm Hitain. I'm an artist. And this is Yu. I have asked her to translate for me.
更重要的是手势、特有的习惯和动作。
I was born and raised near Manchester in England, but I'm not going to say it in English to you, as I'm trying to avoid any assumptions that might be made from my northern accent.
除了要学习口音和腔调以外，还有是去更重要的是手势、特有的习惯和动作。
The only problem with masking it with Chinese Mandarin is I can only speak this paragraph, which I have learned by heart when I visited in China. So all I can do is keep repeating it in different tones and hope you won't notice.
更重要的是手势、特有的习惯。
You do not speak Chinese.
No, I don't.
You actually speak English with a Manchester accent.
Yeah. I guess it was, I like this idea that when we meet somebody, I think it's natural that we want to place them somewhere.
Yeah.
In a part of the world, in a community, in an environment. And so I wanted to take that away a bit because the reality is that our lives and our personalities and whatnot are made up of so much more than your kind of localized area. Your localized area can be the world now.
Hitain Patel was born in a town called Bolton. It's just outside Manchester. His parents immigrated to the UK from India back in the 1960s. And as a kid, he just wanted to be British.
I went to a school where I was the only non-white kid there. And so, from a very young age, you kind of go into the whole process of trying to lose your Indian accent, trying to walk and talk like the natives, and trying to fit in as you do as a kid.
What were the stereotypes that people had of you and your culture that just drive you crazy?
That we... It's funny when I think of these because some of them are true. That we eat curry every day, we eat Indian food every day, which we did. That we stink of curry.
You just called it food.
Exactly.
Right.
It's the school dinners where you have egg, chips, and beans. That's exotic for us. And all the kind of stereotyped relationship to discipline. The idea that we should work all the time and study and things like that. All that was true. But I think the annoying thing, or the thing that would drive me crazy in a way, was that when you're young, you're made to feel that that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
You're made to feel that that's a bad thing. When I was a kid, when I started primary school, when I was 6 years old, I was ashamed of the fact that I spoke Gujarati. I was ashamed of my Indian accent. I was ashamed that I ate curry at home. I was ashamed of the colours and the Hindu things at home. And that for a young kid, it's not good. So I think it's that kind of that you're made to feel that the difference is wrong, or it's inferior, or something that should exclude you.
Yeah, there's such a fine line between stereotyping and identity, and because on the one hand, like when you're a kid, it's normal to want to just be like the other kids, but on the other hand, there are elements of your identity that also get sort of pushed aside.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. Sometimes I talk about my art practice, as kind of a continual struggle to try to be free. Freedom in a lot of ways, whether it's to do with stereotyping or what kind of jobs we're in or what kind of clothes we wear or what we allow, is self-permission. It's what we allow ourselves to believe that we can do or to be or to act.
That's really, I think, the core of it. It's about breaking free from that. Because having limitations put on you, whether you do it to yourself or others do it to you, it's like a trap. It's like a prison.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about freeing yourself from boxes other people put you in or that you put yourself in, but it's also trying to free yourself from perceptions that you have about other people. You know, it has to be both of those ways, not just about yourself, but how you see the outside world.
Which is exactly why Hatain and his so-called translator Yu play with our perceptions in their performances.
更重要的是手势特有的习惯和动作。
So, my artwork is about challenging common assumptions based on what we look like or where we come from. What makes us who we are anyway?
我们可以透过学习不同的语言，来认识不同的文化嘛。
I used to read Spider-Man comics, watch Kung Fu movies, take philosophy lessons from Bruce Lee. He would say things like,
Empty your mind. Be formless. Shapeless. Like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. Put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Be water, my friend.
This year, I'm 32 years old, the same age Bruce Lee was when he died. I have been wondering recently, if he were alive today, what advice he would give me.
Don't imitate my voice. It offends me.
Good advice? But I still think that we learn who we are by copying others. Who here hasn't imitated their childhood hero in the playground, or mom, or father? I have.
Okay, so contrary to what we might usually assume, imitating somebody can reveal something unique. Every time I fail to become more like my father, I become more like myself. Every time I fail to become Bruce Lee, I become more authentically me. This is my art. I strive for authenticity, even if it comes in a shape that we might not usually expect. Thank you.
Performance artist Hatain Patel, you have to watch his whole talk. It is so cool. It's at ted.npr.org. Our show today, ideas about stereotypes, prejudice, and assumptions. Stay with us. I'm Guy Raz, and you're listening to the TED Radio Hour from NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor REI. REI's closed on Black Friday, again, because they think some things are more important than selling stuff, like spending time outside. So join them out there again this year and opt outside. REI Co-op.
It's the TED Radio Hour from NPR. I'm Guy Raz. And on today's show, playing with perceptions. So Jamila Liscott is a first-generation American. Her parents are from Trinidad. She grew up in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. And right now she's working on her PhD in literature and race at Columbia. So she's pretty used to moving between different cultures and different ways of speaking, which didn't seem all that unusual to her until she was about 19, and she was asked to be a guest on an academic panel.
I was speaking my most polished version of academic English, which I'm really adept at.
And a woman came up to Jamila to tell her she was very articulate, which might seem like an innocent comment. But to Jamila right then, it sounded pretty loaded.
And it occurred to me in that moment that had I been speaking with my family who's Trinidadian or with people in my community who speak Black English vernacular, that this woman would have maybe not seen the same worth and value in terms of my intellectual capacity or just me. And so when someone calls me articulate, it's not so much that they've never heard someone put together some words very well. It's that coming from my body, coming from my skin, coming from me, it's suddenly impressive.
On the subway home that night, Jamila started writing a poem about the experience, which she got to perform on the TED stage. Here's an excerpt.
A baffled lady observed the shell where my soul dwells and announced that I'm articulate. Which means that when it comes to enunciation and diction, I don't even think of it because I'm articulate. So when my professor asks a question and my answer is tainted with the connotation of urbanized suggestion, there's no misdirected intention. Pay attention because I'm articulate. So when my father asks, what kind of thing is this? My articulate answer never goes amiss. I say, Father, this is the impending problem at hand, and when I'm on the block, I switch it up just because I can. So when my boy says, what's good with you, son? I say, I just fall out with them people, but I done. And sometimes in class, I might pause the intellectual sound and flow to ask, yo, why these books never be about my peoples? Yes, I have decided to treat all three of my languages as equal because I'm articulate. But who controls articulation? Because the English language is a multifaceted oration subject to indefinite transformation. Now you may think that it is ignorant to speak broken English, but I'm here to tell you that even articulate Americans sound foolish to the British. So when my professor comes on the block and says hello, I stop him and say, no, you're being inarticulate. The proper way is to say what's good. Now, you may think that's too hood. That's not cool. But I'm here to tell you that even our language has rules. So when mommy mocks me and says, y'all be mad going to the store, I say, mommy, no, that sentence is not following the law. Never does the word mad go before a present participle. That's simply the principle of this English. If I had the vocal capacity, I would sing this from every mountaintop, every suburbia, and every hood. Because the only God of language is the one recorded in the genesis of this world, saying it is good, so I may not always come before you with excellency of speech, but do not judge me by my language and assume that I'm too ignorant to teach, because I speak 3 tongues. One for each, home, school, and friends. I'm a trilingual orator. Sometimes I'm consistent with my language now, then switch it up so I don't bore later. Sometimes I fight back 2 tongues while I use the other one in the classroom, and when I mistakenly mix them up, I feel crazy like I'm cooking in the bathroom. I know. Let there be no confusion. Let there be no hesitation. This is not a promotion of ignorance. This is a linguistic celebration. That's why I put trilingual on my last job application. I can help to diversify your consumer market is all I wanted them to know. And when they call me for the interview, I'll be more than happy to show that I can say what's good, what's agwan, and of course, hello. Because I'm articulate. Thank you.
You asked this rhetorical question early on in the poem, who controls articulation?
Mm-hmm.
Who do we think controls it?
I think that we think that language is something neutral and not at all political. I don't think we think too much about who controls language or articulation, but I do think that if you did bring the question up, most people would point to the education system in some way, right? The idea that the values and everything that governs what is allowed in that space reflects so heavily white middle class values. So if you have mastered standard English, I think that's usually very smoothly connected to your intellectual capacity and your worth.
When someone who's not your race, right, when they look at you, do you feel like they're making specific judgments about the kind of person you are?
Most definitely, all the time. Like Du Bois speaks about this double consciousness. You have this lens where you're looking at yourself through the lens of other people, the way that they look at you. That's deeply historical in the Black community.
So it's almost like the stereotype becomes the way you start to view yourself.
It's not that you view yourself that way. I think that there's a tension. I think there's a tension with fighting to not internalize some of what has been placed on you, especially during very important formative years. At a very young age, I knew that at some point I needed to straighten my hair because it was the way to be accepted. And I never questioned it. It was just something that we did. And if you didn't straighten it again, it would just be like straight hair, but then the roots were kinky. And you would get teased by the boys. It was really something to be deeply ashamed of at the time.
And your community was primarily African American, right?
Yep. Like, your roots are showing was something that was literally said, right? And so even now, I still feel a little tiny discomfort because it's like just the pun on the word roots.
Yeah.
That was scarring. I felt like after a while, as I grew older and my consciousness evolved, I chose to not perm my hair anymore.
It was like a stereotype that was internalized within your own community.
Right, which is why I feel the same way when I'm forced to speak a certain way and denounce the other ways of navigating language that come from the cultural and racial spaces in my life.
I mean, that's the thing about stereotypes, is that it sort of applies this collective idea to a community or a culture or a race or a religion or a group of people. And once you're in that collective, it's like you're trapped. You have to constantly fight against it to disprove it. And yet at the same time, you don't want to appear as if you're not part of the collective and loyal to it and reflect it in positive ways as well.
Yeah, that's the tension. One of my favorite authors and scholars, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he wrote a book called Moving the Center. And it's informed my work in a lot of ways, in thinking about a human center, but then how we go about being okay with and sure with building up our own respective centers, the spaces that make us who we are, affirming those spaces and celebrating and engaging the value of those spaces in the service of adding value to humanity. Because what happens when people feel like they have to erase themselves in order to become a part of some mysterious whole is that we rob each other of the beauty of our differences. And that's just tragic.
That's poet and scholar Jamila Liskott. To watch her entire poem, Broken English, go to ted.npr.org. So up to this point, we've been hearing about stereotypes, how we all make judgments about people based on how they look or talk, and the assumption is that these things are all bad.
I think that's an understandable conclusion, but it's not right.
This is Paul Bloom. He teaches psychology at Yale.
And I think that if you think of stereotypes as a flaw in our mind, some sort of pathology or cruelty, you actually won't understand them very well and you won't know how to combat them.
Paul studies human behavior, in particular, why we all make quick judgments about other people.
You don't ask a toddler for directions. You don't ask a very old person to help you move a sofa. And that's because you stereotype. Now, stereotypes then go awry in all sorts of ways, and they cause horrible moral problems and horrible rational problems. But this is because a system that has been evolved to make generalizations in certain circumstances can go wrong in other circumstances.
So when Paul explored these ideas on the TED stage, he explained how the mind does this.
So if you look at me, you know my name, you know certain facts about me, and you can make certain judgments. You could make guesses about my ethnicity, my political affiliation, my religious beliefs. And the thing is, these judgments tend to be accurate. We're very good at this sort of thing. And we're very good at this sort of thing because our ability to stereotype people is not some sort of arbitrary quirk of the mind, but rather it's a specific instance of a more general process, which is that we have experience with things and people in the world that fall into categories, and we could use our experience to make generalizations about novel instances of these categories. So everybody here has a lot of experience with chairs and apples and dogs. And based on this, you could see these unfamiliar examples, and you could guess you could sit on the chair, you could eat the apple, the dog will bark. Now, we might be wrong. The chair could collapse if you sit on it, the apple might be poisoned, the dog might not bark. But for the most part, we're good at this. For the most part, we make good guesses, both in the social domain and the non-social domain. And if we weren't able to do so, if we weren't able to make guesses about new instances that we encounter, we wouldn't survive.
What assumptions do we make, like, pretty much right away when we encounter somebody?
The big three that social psychologists talk about are age, sex, and race. So when you look at somebody in a fraction of a second, you record a kid, an adult, an old person, man, woman, Chinese, American, black, white, whatever. You do this in a fraction of a second. It's unconscious. It's very powerful. And those generalizations show up as early as you can test them. So babies like to hear their own language over other languages. They like to look at faces that are familiar over those that are unfamiliar, and actually like to look at familiar races over unfamiliar races. So a white baby raised by white people prefers to look at white faces than black faces. Though it's not the baby's own race, so if the baby's white but raised by a multi-ethnic bunch, the baby will show no preferences.
Okay, so I get age, I get gender, but why are we wired to see race so differently when, didn't we all look the same in East Africa like 40,000 years ago?
I think that's an excellent point, and I mentioned the three generalizations, sex and age and race, but a lot of evolutionary theorists pointed out that race is the odd man out for the reasons that you pointed out. Sex and age are always going to be relevant for any primate, but race is a novelty. It's a modern thing that's emerged only in recent history. And so our focus on race then is less determined than our focus on sex and age. And this fits very nicely with the data from children. So there's no experiment has ever found that children don't care about sex and age when making decisions. They're always sensitive to it. But when kids pay attention to race, it's not because they're biologically built to be intuitive racists, but rather it's because they've learned that race matters in the world we live in.
And Paul says the problem is that racial stereotypes are often flat out wrong.
There was a fascinating study prior to the 2008 election where social psychologists looked at the extent to which the candidates were associated with America, as in an unconscious association with the American flag. And in one of their studies, they compared Obama and McCain, and they found McCain is thought of as more American than Obama. And to some extent, people aren't that surprised by hearing that. McCain is a celebrated war hero, and many people would explicitly say he has more of an American story than Obama. But they also compared Obama to British Prime Minister Tony Blair. And they found that Blair was also thought of as more American than Obama, even though subjects explicitly understood he's not American at all. But they were responding, of course, to the color of his skin.
That is amazing to me, that people would say that. And you think about it, and you think, well, I wouldn't say that. But then you think, well, maybe I would.
So that's right. So there's so many social psychology experiments showing, and this is really the pernicious side of stereotypes, that even in cases where we know a stereotype doesn't apply, or we know it's mistaken, we're guided by it anyway. And these are done, for the most part, I think, by well-intentioned people who would never dream that they'd be racist. But we are influenced by factors we don't know about.
You know, earlier, Jamila Liska was talking about language as a conveyor of stereotypes, right? And about how being called articulate, for example, is a code.
Yes, I think Joe Biden slipped up and called Obama articulate in the primaries.
Yeah, this has real-world consequences. This is a real thing that happens everywhere, all the time, every day, every second of the day.
It's as if you called an elderly relative lucid. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
So you're right. The language often reveals your expectations. To call somebody articulate is in some way reflecting the intuition that this is a surprising fact.
Yeah.
Or to say somebody's clean or composed or non-aggressive it would be an odd thing to say unless you believe there was some reason to believe that they weren't. So now that we know about this, how do we combat it? And there are different avenues. One avenue is to appeal to people's emotional responses, to appeal to people's empathy. And we often do that through stories. Stories can turn anonymous strangers into people who matter. And the idea that we care about people when we focus on them as individuals is an idea which has shown up across history. Psychologists have explored this. For instance, in one study, people were given a list of facts about a crisis, and it was seen how much they would donate. And another group was given no facts at all, but they were told about an individual and given a name and given a face. And it turns out that they gave far more. It's possible that by extending our sympathies to an individual, they can spread to the group that the individual belongs to.
I mean, it's like a case for making a conscious choice and decision to reach out to people who are different from you.
It really is. So you can't change implicit biases by just sitting in your room and concentrating and saying, I'm not going to be racist, I'm not going to be racist. But what you can do is you could actively expose yourself to real-world instances which give you maybe a more accurate and more fair representation of these groups. We know that when it comes to choosing somebody for a job, for an award, we are strongly biased by their race, we are biased by their gender, we are biased by how attractive they are. And sometimes we might say, well, fine, that's the way it should be. But other times we say, this is wrong. And so to combat this, we don't just try harder, but rather what we do is we set up situations where these other sources of information can't bias us, which is why many orchestras audition musicians behind screens. So the only information they have is the information they believe should matter. I think prejudice and bias illustrate the fundamental duality of human nature. We have gut feelings, instincts, emotions, and they affect our judgments and our actions for good and for evil. But we are also capable of rational deliberation and intelligent planning. And we can use these to, in some cases, accelerate and nourish our emotions, and in other cases, staunch them. And it's in this way that reason helps us create a better world. Thank you.
Paul Bloom is a professor of psychology at Yale University. He has 2 fascinating talks up at TED.com.
We're all alike, all alike. All know the difference between wrong and right. We all put the baby in the cradle at night. We all need love, and that's all right. We're all alike.
Thanks for listening to our show this week, Playing with Perceptions. Our production staff at NPR includes Jeff Rogers, Brent Bachman, Megan Kane, Sanaz Meshkinpour, and Bridget McCarthy, with help from our intern Amanda Honigfort, Daniel Shukin, Portia Robertson-Migas, and Eric Newsom. Our partners at TED include Chris Anderson, June Cohen, Darren Triff, and Janet Lee. I'm Guy Raz, and you've been listening to Ideas Worth Spreading on the TED Radio Hour from NPR.
We all know the difference between wrong and right. All put the baby in the cradle at night. We all need love, and that's all right. We're all alike.
Hey, if you are still listening to this podcast, you should check out another great show. It's called Latino USA. Latino USA covers current and emerging issues that impact Latinos and other people of color, reporting on how people live, struggle with, and celebrate difference. Latino USA chronicles how Latinos are living, shaping, and changing America. You can find Latino